Today's Water Quality Trading Baseline Policy Proposal Public Listening Session. I'm Christy Williams with Eastern Research Group. Today's in-person listening session is also being presented as a webinar. I'll be moderating the in-person session, and Amanda Forsey, my colleague at ERG, will be moderating the webinar portion. Louis Niera is helping with registration along with Danielle Steffen and Sean Ramish from EPA. They're outside the registration table. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items. So for those of you in the room, as a reminder, this is a federal government facility and you'll need an escort basically to go out of this area. So go to the registration table and they'll be more than happy to help you get where you need to go. If you'd like to make a statement and you haven't done so already, you can go out and sign up at the registration desk quickly, or you can wait until after the first webinar participants make their statements, line up behind the microphone, and we'll take your statement at that time. Note that verbal statements today will not be considered formal Federal Register comments. However, the transcript from the listening session will be submitted to the docket in its entirety. We have a court reporter here to do that. Participants in the room will give their statements in the order that we call you, and then we will go to webinar participants. Again, if you decide either during the presentation or during the webinar statements that you do indeed want to make a statement and you've not signed up, line up behind the microphone in the room and we'll take your statement after the webinar participants. For our online webinar attendees, audio is available for this presentation through your computer's mic and speakers or by telephone. Your call-in number and access code are in the control panel box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you'd like to make a statement today, please call in using your telephone to ensure a higher quality of sound. If you call in using your phone, please make sure you enter your PIN number visible in the control panel after you call in. All participants have been muted to minimize background noise. We'll individually unmute you if you've requested to make a statement. When you make your statement, please do not use your phone's speakerphone, as there'll be background noise that we'll be able to hear. If you didn't sign up to make a statement, but you decide to today, please let us know in the chat box. You'll be given an opportunity to speak after the second round of in-person statements are given. Amanda will be moderating that, and she'll let you know in plenty of time. For those attending both online and in person, we currently have 4 in-person participants and 6 webinar participants who wish to make a statement. We will take in-person statements first and then go to webinar, as I've stated. We'll continue to take statements as necessary until all who wish to make a statement have made them, or 5 p.m., whichever comes first. We will call each person and also let the next person know that they're on deck so that they'll know that they'll be next. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes or less. I have warning cards, and I'll give you a warning when you start to reach the end of your time. I'll give you a 1-minute warning. Amanda will give the webinar participants a 1-minute warning as well. It's important that you state your name and any organization that you wish to be associated with at the beginning of your statement. Everyone who wishes to make a statement in the room must speak into the microphone that's in the center of the room to be sure that everybody in the room can hear you and the folks on the webinar can hear you as well. And now I'll turn it over to Anna Wilderman, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Water.
Good afternoon, and also good morning to those on the phone. Welcome to EPA and to our listening session on our recent Federal Register notice on water quality trading and baselines. You know, we really began this conversation back in February when we issued a memo laying out 6 principles to promote market-based approaches, and including water quality trading, for water quality improvements. One of those principles was the need for more flexible treatment of baselines in trading programs and other market-based programs. So our recent Federal Register notice is really the next step in moving forward with that discussion in trying to build opportunities to create more flexible baselines. EPA is committed to continuing to create real change in this space and break down barriers that have to date really prevented widespread adoption of market-based approaches. We talk a lot about nutrients when we talk about water quality trading, and that's for good reason. Nutrients remains one of our biggest water quality challenges. But I do want to note that our 2019 memo is not limited to nutrients. It should be considered by policymakers and stakeholders to apply to all tradable pollutants. Before we get started today, I do want to acknowledge and thank our dedicated career staff who have worked on this issue for the last many, many months to get to a place where we're here today to talk about a number of different policy options that may be appropriate depending on the state and the circumstance and the community. So we would not be having this discussion today without you guys, so thank you. Today, we are not only asking for comments on the proposal, the proposed policy options that we put out, but also on other areas where EPA can better align the themes from the 2003 water quality trading policy with those that were incorporated into our February memo from this year. So we look forward to hearing all of your comments, both on the baseline policies and beyond that. So thanks again for coming today, and look forward to hearing from you. Now we're going to hear from Amelia to walk through the Federal Register notice and facilitate discussion.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. Let me check that my clicker works from this distance, and it does. So I want to start out talking a little bit about what water quality trading is. We can't get into the details of how we're going to set up a program until we understand what that program is. So water quality trading at its heart is a voluntary program. It's a voluntary exchange of water quality credits generated through pollutant reductions. So what we do is we see what is the most cost-efficient way we can do this. We allow sources that have higher pollutant control costs to purchase credits from sources with lower costs, creating a net environmental improvement and at a lower cost. This flexibility lets us innovate. It lets us innovate not just in the point source sector, but also in the non-point source sector. It gives us an opportunity to leverage point source requirements to encourage non-point source voluntary reductions. And it lets us really look at a wide variety of factors that reduce overall pollutant loads, whether or not they line up exactly with a permit condition. So that's water quality trading. The next question is, what is baseline? You know, this Federal Register notice is about the baselines component specifically. Well, a credit is a unit of reduction available for trading. Well, how do you know what is available to trade? That's the heart of the baselines question. The baseline level is the discharge level expected of the source. It applies both to buyers and sellers. With point sources, it's pretty clear. We know what our limits are. With non-point sources, it can be a little more complex. My next slide is going to walk through all of this. Previously, we had a policy that really expected credit sellers to meet their baseline on site-specific basis before they could generate credits. And what we're saying is we might need to shift away from that to create that flexibility for innovation that we talked about. So I want to talk about what exactly was the intent of this Federal Register notice. What are we talking about here? When we talk about baseline, we could be talking about buyers or sellers. Buyers typically are point sources. They have NPDES permits that require reductions in their pollutant discharge. They are our primary buyers. You can have a fully voluntary market, but that's not the focus here. You can also have baselines for sellers. For buyers, it's pretty simple. You need to meet your permit limit. You can do that through trading. That is the basis of trading, is being able to meet your permit limit through trading. For sellers, it matters if you're a point source or non-point source. For point sources, once again, you have a permit limit. You must meet your permit limit. Anything you reduce beyond your permit limit becomes available for a trade. For non-point sources, we want to look at whether or not you're subject to a total maximum daily load. If you're not subject to total maximum daily load, if you're in a watershed that is either not impaired or it's impaired and a TMDL has not yet been developed or does not need to be developed, we look at our state and local requirements and current practice to determine what's expected. If you are subject to total maximum daily load, then your expectations have changed with this Federal Register notice potentially. So previously, this had been where we would say you were expected to meet your portion of the TMDL load allocation. That's what we say in the 2003 policy, and that's what we're looking to shift. So I want to show you, we're really looking at a very narrow sliver, but options that we provide could apply in many of these other scenarios. They are not limited to non-point sources subject to TMDL. That was just the challenge that we were looking at. So when you look at these options, they were written with a view to the TMDL, but they could absolutely be applied, and in many cases would absolutely be appropriately applied in other scenarios, such as for a non-point source that is not subject to a TMDL. So I want to talk a little bit about the memo that Anna mentioned. This established a new vision for market-based approaches. It took us on a new direction, thinking about how to make it more flexible, more innovative, and breaking down those barriers. This does take precedence over existing policy. However, it is not comprehensive. It does not address every aspect of the existing policy, so that existing policy still is somewhere to look, but then check and see whether or not it's been updated in 2019. There were 6 market-based principles: watershed scale implementation, adaptive management, banking credits, which is the ability to use credits over time, flexibility and baselines, credit stacking, which is the ability to use multiple markets for the same activity. For example, if you had a riparian buffer that was both a carbon sink and a nutrient filter, you could get credits for both of those. And financing for non-point source practices, getting that financing on the ground to encourage non-point source reduction. So we are obviously here to talk about the flexibilities and baselines component of it. We issued a Federal Register notice to implement this memo. It is not the last thing that we will be publishing to implement the memo, but it is the first big published document. We are asking for comment on the specific policy options I'll be discussing today. But as Anna mentioned, we're also looking for other areas where we need clarification, where there might be a difference or ambiguity between the 2003 and the 2019 policies. So we're looking broader than just whether or not people like the options available. I also do want to point out we're not looking for a vote on which option is the best. We believe that whichever of these options are supportable, we want to move forward, and that state programs can decide which of them are most appropriate. So we are not looking to pick one of the options, we're rather looking to see which of these options are supportable. So we have a variety of options, as I mentioned. Some are policy changes, some are not. Some are just clarifying existing policy. They're an area that we never addressed in writing before, and we want to give that clarity to the public. These options can be used individually or together in a program. We don't think that any program needs to pick one. Some of them you kind of need to pick, but many of them can be used overlapping in a program. So the first area that we're talking about is redefining baseline, and this is really the biggest change to policy, and this is what I was talking about that subject to a TMDL, non-point source baseline. Our 2003 policy recommended that individual non-point sources would make their portion of the load allocation, called the baseline, before they could generate credits or offsets. So you had to do your portion, however that was determined, of load allocation. Say it was a 50% reduction on your farm. You'd have to make that 50% reduction, and the 50% plus 1 pound, you could sell that pound. This was seen as a really challenging barrier to make all those reductions up front. And in 2019, our proposed new policy recommends that non-point sources be allowed to generate credits for any pollutant reductions that are not including the assumptions that support the TMDL load allocation. So they can't be something the TMDL load allocation already said we need to do this specifically to meet the load allocation. Any such pollutant reductions would be immediately available for use by point sources as credits. I've gotten a lot of questions. I've been talking to stakeholders about this, about what exactly does that look like. The easiest example I have is a practice-based example. If you had a TMDL and it was determined that all you needed to do for every non-point source to meet the TMDL was install fencing. We want to keep the cows out of the water, and if we do that, we will meet our TMDL. Say you wanted to instead install cover crops. Under the previous policy, you would have to install your fence, and then you could install cover crops and get credits for them. Now what you can do is you can install those cover crops, not do the fence yet, and you can get the credit for the cover crops. You couldn't do fencing and get credits because that was assumed as part of the TMDL, but you could do a different activity that gets you reductions and immediately get those credits. So that's just one kind of very simplified example to help people think through the difference between the old and the new policy. So the next option is incremental baselines. These baselines are a really nice interim alternative between this new definition where you can generate credits immediately and all those credits can go towards saleable credits as opposed to towards load allocation, and the previous policy that expected the TMDL load allocation to be met in advance. In this situation, we would actually split whatever reductions you make. As a policy position, the state would decide at what percent. It could be 10, it could be 20, it could be 50, it could be 5, whatever makes sense in that watershed. And some portion would go towards meeting that load allocation and some portion would go towards saleable credits. So if you made a 10-pound reduction, you were expected to do a 20% towards the load allocation. 2 pounds would go to load allocation, 8 pounds would be available for sale. Compliance schedules. Both compliance schedules and our next topic, variances, to me are in a similar category in that they are existing policy options that we believe are appropriate with trading, but we've never talked about them before. And when we had individual conversations, we might say, absolutely, you can use a compliance schedule with trading. Absolutely, you can use a variance. We hadn't talked through what that would look like. So for both compliance schedules and variances, what this policy really does is set out how those would interact, how they can interact together, and how they interact together with trading. Again, this is not new policy. It's just the first time that it's come out in this kind of format. Alternate approaches to disaggregation is most appropriate for states that continue to use their TMDL baseline, that want to continue, that establish their programs under the previous policy. They want to keep that policy. But they might realize when we said 50% reduction, we didn't actually think that was going to happen in every sector or in every watershed, sub-watershed in the same way. So previously, I think we had shorthanded, 50% reduction in the TMDL means 50% reduction across the watershed. And we're saying here that might not be the case. You want to do this analysis on a TMDL-wide basis, but you might say, I have a sector that has been spent the last 10 years installing incredible technology and has really put their money where their mouth is and made those improvements, and I don't think they need to do more to meet a baseline. However, I have another sector that really has lagged behind, and that's where I think they need to pick up the pace, get to the baseline level. It also might be done by watershed. You might say, I have this sub-watershed that really can't make reductions and this sub-watershed that can. You could do it on a socioeconomic basis. You could say, we're going to look at MHI to determine which cities should make which reductions. So we're really just saying here is there are other ways to do it as long as it all adds up to the load allocation reduction that you need. Last but not least is our in lieu fee program. This is a program, I think of it as setting up the state in some ways as a bank. In this situation, it allows MPDS permitted facilities to meet their WQBLs by paying into a state fund, specifically allocated for non-point source loading reductions. So it can't go into the state general fund or the state environmental fund. It needs to be a fund that actually funds non-point source reductions on the ground in that TMDL watershed. But it does allow the state to focus those resources in the most environmental impactful way possible. So when we're looking at a straight market, we might see that it's the cheapest credits that are done first. But if you are looking at a state-driven market, you're going to have a more holistic view of the watershed and be looking at where you're going to get the most environmental benefit, not necessarily the cheapest credits. So I have a couple of additional resources here. Here's our website and the policy proposal, which is a tab on the website. The easiest way is probably just Google EPA water quality trading, and this will pop right up. But this is the official link. I want to come back to what we're actually requesting for our comments now that we've hit all of the options. We want comments on those options. I want to know what you think is functional on the ground. I want to know what is going to make the biggest difference. I want to know what you think is defensible and how you think it might be more defensible. What's clear and what's vague. Let me know how this policy can stand. At the end of the day, I can tell you what I think this policy is, but if it's not written down in the final policy, then it's not EPA policy. So we want to make it as clear as possible. And again, I want those other areas. What's next? This is what I do all day, every day, is water quality trading. And so as we think about what to do with baselines, I'm also looking towards what the next project is going to be. What other areas from the 2019 memo do we want to get some more clarity on, or more direction from EPA? How to comment. Our comment period is open through November 18th. If you go to that policy proposal website, you will find a link to the docket. It's also here. Only written comments will be accepted in the docket, so we're listening to what you're saying here, and it's certainly influencing how we view this policy proposal. But if you want a formal comment, you're going to need to submit it. You can, if you've written down what you want to say here, you can absolutely just submit that transcript as your comment, but we do need it submitted to the docket. And that's it. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to turn it over to Christy so we can hear from you.
Okay, we're going to get started with the in-person comments, and I'm going to let you know there's 4 of you so far. I'll let you know the order that we have you speaking in. Again, please come to the mic in the middle of the room. Stand pretty close to the microphone so that everyone not only in the room can hear you, but also those on the webinar. And remember, you have 3 minutes. You will see this when you have 1 minute left, and we're going to do the same thing for folks on the webinar. They'll go after the in-person. So the order we have right now is Seth Brown, then Clay Detlefson, Albert Ettinger, Stephen Rowe, and Bruce Knight. If you guys want to, Seth, if you want to go ahead and come up, and Clay, you will be next.
How many EPA employees does it take to turn on microphones? All right, my name is Seth Brown, and I'm with a firm called Storm and Stream Solutions, but I'm also here representing the Water Environment Federation Stormwater Institute and the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance, as well as Georgia Mason University. I don't think I can wear many more hats than that. And I don't have a whole lot of specifics on this at this time. I just wanted to generally state that all the organizations that I'm affiliated with are very encouraged by the memo in February, as well as the event in August, as well as this event and the opportunity to provide some comments on this. I am closely tied with the stormwater sector, urban stormwater sector. So in that context, there's huge needs, as I think most folks know here, in challenges in meeting requirements. And there's great potential in market-based trading and water quality trading generally that has not been realized as to this point. And I can just tell you that there's a high amount of interest across the country that I've seen through the organizations that I'm involved with as much flexibility as can be provided, and policy clarification and consistency, and just additional flexibilities, I'll say. Again, there's a huge funding gap in between what's needed and the funding that's available. EPA has been involved with that and shown leadership in that area, which is greatly appreciated as well. Using market-based approaches obviously gives us efficiencies that we may not otherwise have. And there's a lot of states who are challenged in meeting the requirements and wanting to do more. So I just wanted to, I'll wrap up and just say that I appreciate this and encourage, EPA to do more. And if there's anything that the organizations that I'm involved with can help out in any way, we've worked with EPA, put out publications, conferences, events like that, webcasts. We're happy to do more of that to try to get the word out and try to flesh out more details, and we will be providing comments on everything that was presented here. So thank you.
Okay, up next is Mr. Detlefson, and after that will be Albert Ettinger.
Good afternoon. My name is Clay Detlefson, and I work for the National Milk Producers Federation. I want to thank you for holding this meeting and for creating an opportunity to advance environmental markets and water quality trading. National Milk was organized in 1916 to provide a forum for dairy producers and the cooperatives they own to participate in public policy discussions. National Milk advocates policies to Congress, the U.S. and foreign government agencies, industry organizations, the news media, and the public. And NPF addresses policies concerning milk pricing, domestic and international market development, agriculture credit and taxation, environmental issues, food safety and health, animal welfare, product standards and labeling, and research in biotechnology. Obviously, we keep busy. With respect to environmental issues, National Milk is a strong supporter of pursuing market-based solutions to environmental challenges. National Milk firmly believes in water quality trading and was on the steering committee of the National Network on Water Quality Trading, which published Building a Water Quality Trading Program, Options and Considerations, and Breaking Down Barriers, Priority Actions for Advancing Water Quality Trading. I know EPA is familiar with both of those documents. National Milk has been involved with Maryland's effort to launch a water quality trading program, and we've been engaged with water quality procurement legislation in Pennsylvania. We're anxious to see a water quality trading program take off and deliver what traditional regulatory approaches have failed to do. We strongly support EPA's efforts to promote water quality improvements at a lower cost than traditional regulatory approaches. We agree with the EPA that the Clean Water Act allows for pollutant reductions from water quality trading to achieve compliance with regulatory requirements. National Milk appreciates EPA's efforts in 2019 to update your water quality trading policy to incentivize the implementation of technologies and practices to reduce non-point source pollution. And we concur with the 6 principles laid out in the 2019 memorandum. And NPF commends EPA's actions and believes that it has raised a number of important questions in the Federal Register notice on September 19th that need to be answered. To that end, National Milk will submit written comments to more fully address those issues and questions raised. Prior to doing so, we can state that EPA is correct in asserting that expecting non-point source pollution, a non-point source to meet a pollution reduction baseline derived from a TMD allocation before the non-point source can generate credits is a problem. Thank you for your time in this matter.
Okay, next is Mr. Albert Ettinger, and after that will be Stephen Rowe.
Hello, I'm shorter than the last 2 speakers. I'm Albert Ettinger. I'm a lawyer in Chicago, private practice. I represent environmental organizations. Particularly today, I'm here representing a coalition of groups called Clean Water for All, which is focused on drinking water and surface water, creating fishable, swimmable waters. I'm also working with the Mississippi River Collaborative, which has worked on nutrient pollution for over a decade. I would have to say the Mississippi Basin is kind of ground zero for nutrient pollution, and we're particularly concerned with trading policy, given the lack of progress that has been made on nutrient pollution over the years. We just heard you want to know what would make the biggest difference. Well, the biggest difference would be if US EPA did its job and required the states to require water quality-based effluent limits in NPDES permits. Right now, nobody wants to buy a trade, or very few people want to buy a trade, because there's no incentive to buy a trade if you don't have a requirement. In most places, there is no requirement. And so you don't have trading in Illinois for the same reason that you can't sell hurricane insurance in Kansas. There is no demand. I just attended several meetings in Illinois in which they looked at trading schemes for years and decided there was not a regulatory driver to cause anyone to want to trade, not at this point. And Illinois has more permit limits than most other states. That's as a result of legal action taken under the Clean Water Act. It's not as a result of voluntary programs. I'd like to talk now, about a couple of other things. Is basically the whole scheme has got to lead to a reduction in pollution. It has to lead to improved water quality. This is not a get out of jail free card. But then let's look at the classical problems. First of all, there's got to be a cap. We are pleased to see that this proposal contemplates that there'll be a TMDL in place, so there will be a cap. Second problem is we can't have hot spots, of course. We can't be trading. We can't have Peter versus Paul and having one place violating water quality standards or being allowed to continue violating water quality standards. We're very concerned about enforcement. If a non-point source is going to have less pollution and a point source is going to have more, how is that going to be enforced? Typically now, non-point sources are not filing any sort of DMRs or other requirements. So how are we going to know whether that practice was in fact put into place? Further, how are we going to measure these reductions? You say you're going to put in a fence. How much reduction is that actually going to result in? These ratios are not very clear. I can put a meter on a point source and I know how much pollution they're putting out. It's not clear that we can do that with a cornfield or that it can be done as easily. Finally, or not quite finally, funding. We're asking the states to set up in these trading schemes in most places. While EPA has been reducing the amount of regulation done by the federal level and deferring to the states have all been cutting their enforcement budgets in many cases. I certainly hope it's not contemplated they're going to take further money out of enforcement budgets in order to run trading schemes. Finally, we're extremely suspicious of the whole in-lieu program. Any sort of in-lieu program that we have seen in the past has simply not worked. It's led to funds sitting in state treasuries that are never spent, and certainly there has been very little incentive to do so. Also in places like Wisconsin, we've seen caps on in-lieu fees that are utterly absurd. And frankly, who's going to pay an in-lieu fee unless they think they're going to realize a reduction through it? With that, I will say we're not totally opposed to trading. We think there's an implicit, certainly we want to see the reductions made at the best cost possible, but an open-ended scheme that's just going to result in inaction or further inaction is not acceptable.
Is Mr. Rowe, and after Mr. Rowe will be Bruce Knight.
Thank you. So I'm Steve Rowe, an environmental practitioner and president and CEO of an organization called Nutrient. We're a company that represents the interests of more than half the milk produced in this country and the tens of thousands of dairy farmers of all sizes across the country. Our mission is to reduce the environmental footprint of dairy and make it economically viable to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these informal comments, and then subsequently we will provide more formal and technical comments on the policies that are being talked about today. Market mechanisms certainly pose some challenges, and I agree with many of the things that Mr. Edinger has listed, but the opportunities of what this can provide are so great, it's worth the effort, and that's what we need to work through. It provides opportunities to engage an entirely new community in pollution prevention, agriculture, forestry, open lands, really this non-point source world that we have not really put our weight into since the beginning of the Clean Water Act. It creates new sources of incomes for these farms that we know, if you've been watching, have been struggling over the last few years, and it encourages the next generation of farmers to engage in issues that until this discussion, they may not have really been able to participate. It may also contribute to preventing the hollowing out of our rural communities and could rebuild a damaged relationship between urban and rural producers and consumers. Significantly, it can improve the environmental performance overall at a lower cost. And what a better conversation to have across this country surrounding food and the environment. I think it's a very healthy conversation, and I continue to encourage it. This is working around the world. Globally, there's about $40 billion a year, that's $1 billion a year, spent on some sort of environmental market mechanism, and $27 billion a year is being spent on water quality related programs around the world. It is not a substitute for regulation, but is an added tool that can really be very effective across the country and in most watersheds. We commit to no backsliding, and if we channel funds properly, it it can actually improve the condition of environmental justice issues today. There's a new world around this. Environmentally, since this discussion started decades ago, technologies and practices have improved, measuring and modeling tools have improved. It's the economics that really needs to be fleshed out. Commodity pricing in agriculture is a challenge. In the past, when we put on new regulations on point sources, you could raise prices of certain products or services being provided. In the agricultural world, commodity pricing does not allow that. And so the economics, the positive incentives need to be generated in this space. We need to engage in a positive way. Specific to the water quality policy being discussed today and in our subsequent comments, baselines should not be tied to sector allocations, but more based on the specific law required of that specific facility providing the credit. Directionally, we are so pleased with this conversation that's been going on for a couple of years, and we encourage it and will participate in any way we can. One thing to keep in mind is that we can now separate the buyer from the seller, and that there does not have to be a connection between a particular buyer and a particular seller. And I believe that is something we've not yet fleshed out, much like banking, which we've started to talk about, but I think there's much more room here. The last thing hasn't really come up, and then I'll stop, is that we're trying to add clarification to an old policy, and I would ask staff to consider, are there portions or is the entire policy in 2003 time to be rescinded and rebuilt? Open, honest question about, are we trying to make it fit, square peg into a round hole, and should we step back and say what we're building now really is a modern day forward-looking policy? Something I would ask them to consider. So, thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Mr. Bruce Knight.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for doing this listening session. My name is Bruce Knight. I have a consulting firm called Strategic Conservation Solutions. Was previously the chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service at USDA at the time of the 2003 memo, and then following that, Undersecretary of Agriculture. I'm speaking now on behalf of the Ecosystem Market Consortium. The ESMC is a market consortium of nearly 40 different foundations, think tanks, and companies who have come together believing that now is the time and a ripe time in which we can advance ecosystem market trading. We have developed a protocol, or are now doing our first level of pilots on being able to trade not just one credit associated with one ecosystem service, but rather three ecosystem services: carbon, water quality, and water quantity. And the justification is this, that for much of agriculture, it's going to be much more practical to be able to do a multimodal approach and be able to develop one uniform platform that will do all of those. This opportunity is very rare. This opportunity has been furthered by means of the memo that EPA just issued, because we needed this additional flexibility. When I was chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service at that time, working with EPA in creating the 2003 memo, we had never intended it to be as rigid and structured in interpretation as it has been over the last decade and a half. And this revisit is a great opportunity to take the lessons learned from the regulatory side at EPA and each of the state agencies and look at how we can proceed forward into the future. At Ecosystem Markets Consortium, we've taken the same effort and looked at the last 2 decades of attempts at water markets, water quantity markets, and carbon markets, and tried to do the same lessons learned. And what we've learned is that one of the biggest challenges is actually the cost of measurement, reporting, and verification. And so we're striving to find rapid ways in which we can maintain the integrity needed in a trading platform using modern technologies and measurement and randomization of it in order to be able to achieve each of those efforts. We support the 6 points that have been outlined in the EPA memo. We will be providing comments during the comment period on behalf of the Ecosystem Market Consortium. We appreciate what has been done there. And I want to stress with folks the importance of also approaching this with a mindset towards scale. We have a target market here of 200 to 250 million acres that we believe we can be generating ecosystem market credits on active agricultural lands over the next 10 years. We will, in fact, over the next 2 to 3 years, during our piloting stage, do this on 300,000 acres, which means that our pilots alone will exceed what has been done in the last 2 decades in many of the other trading mechanisms. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. We will now move to the online attendees who have indicated that they would like to make a statement. So the order today of people who are currently on the line is Frederick Andes. Next, we'll hear from Jeff Corbin, then Lori Hawks, then Liping Zhang, and last but not least, Derek Wynn. If anyone else on the webinar would like to make a statement, please type that into the chat box and we will call on you at the end of today's presentation. So we will start with Fred Andes, and I do want to note for all of our online attendees, please keep an eye on your chat box and I will give you a 1-minute warning. Fred, you're up.
Thank you. Excuse me, this is Fred Andes at Barnes & Thornburg. I run a group called the Federal Water Quality Coalition. We will be submitting detailed comments to the docket on the Federal Register notice. In terms of general principles, I would say that we have supported trading. We believe that, and we support the agency's goal of promoting water quality trading as an important part of the Clean Water Act program. We believe that agency policy over the years has been somewhat inconsistent and unclear, and we think this is an opportunity to address those issues. It's important for all stakeholders, we believe, when establishing markets like for trading, for there to be certainty and stability. And we think that that's something we want to continue discussing with the agency and the other stakeholders, not only as to trading with TMDLs, but trading without TMDLs, not only trading between point and non-point sources, but also between point and point sources. We look forward to addressing those issues. In addition to the baseline issues, we also think that there are other issues that have proven to be significant hurdles in establishing and implementing effective trading programs, including issues about allocation of liability, issues about banking, and others. So we will be submitting further comments on these issues by the comment deadline and look forward to further discussions on all of these issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we will have Jeff Corbin, followed by Lori Hawks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak briefly today. My name is Jeff Corbin, and I currently have the privilege of working for an environmental restoration and mitigation company called Restoration Systems. We have been in operation for over 25 years and have projects on the ground in more than a dozen states. We are based out of Raleigh. I'm in our Richmond, Virginia office. Prior to that, I spent 6 years with EPA, advising 2 EPA administrators on Chesapeake Bay policy. Prior to that, I was the privilege of being Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources for Governor Kane here in Virginia. And prior to that, almost a decade with an environmental conservation group that was focused on the Chesapeake Bay. So I say that just kind of let you know that in trading discussions, I think I've been on about every side of the table that there can be, and I've been as strong of an advocate for market-based programs as anybody can be. I want to thank you for taking a thoughtful and incremental approach to revising the agency's policy. I'm guessing one option on the table was to throw out the 2003 policy and start from scratch. And while that may have had some supporters, I think that would have generated a huge amount of opposition and probably resulted in little, if any, progress. To me, what trading does under a TMDL is it saves money and it trades time so that some reductions, many of them more cost-effective, can be achieved prior to other more costly reductions. We have very vibrant water quality trading programs in Virginia and North Carolina, and they have significantly reduced the cost of meeting water quality requirements for developers, municipalities, and for large state infrastructure projects. And really, my elevator pitch for years to anybody who wants to talk trading is very simple. If you think we're going to have enough public funds to restore all of our impaired waters, be it the Chesapeake, the Great Lakes, or any favorite nearby stream or river, you are delusional. We are simply not going to have enough federal and state and local funds to do it. So to me, the question is not, should we infuse more private dollars? It's a question of how do we do it? And the when is now. It's simply now is the time to expand and come up with a more robust program. I agree with the EPA statement in the Federal Register. It said that trading would represent a relatively small portion of total loadings under a TMDL. I agree with that, and therefore anybody who might oppose water quality trading should not be concerned that it's going to unravel a TMDL or let other sources of pollution off the hook. There is great potential to achieve significant pollution reductions via trading, especially under a more flexible baseline. But it is equally important for the long-term vitality of my industry, the private environmental mitigation and restoration industry, that we have clear and transparent operating rules. So thank you for doing this. In addition to reducing pollution loads, a more flexible baseline could help us achieve other restoration goals as well. Let me give you a very clear example. In the Chesapeake Bay region, there's an annual watershed-wide goal of planting 900 miles of riparian buffers. Between 2016 and 2017, the year where the last data was available, less than 90 miles were planted. A goal of 900 and less than 90 were planted. I think the number was actually below 60. Water quality trading under a more flexible baseline, where riparian buffers can be planted in excess of the buffer size that's needed to meet the TMDL and thereby generate credits, that could increase the miles of buffers planted and assist in meeting our bay-wide goal. In addition, water quality would benefit because we'd be planting more and bigger riparian buffers. Maybe most importantly, in the states I'm familiar with, state and federal funds for agricultural cost share programs run out long before the demand for farmers has been met. An influx of private dollars via market-based trading programs can help minimize that shortfall. While practitioners such as I certainly want to see water quality trading and other market-based programs expand and thrive, we do not want to do so if the result is compromised water quality or delay of restoration deadlines. Therefore, it is critical to ensure that some degree of TMDL implementation be required so that water quality trading does not disproportionately become an income generator for landowners who have done the least amount of implementation thus far. To address that point, it might be appropriate to implement some sort of a sliding scale, whereby higher percentage of credits are generated and released on farms where significant pollution reduction practices have already been implemented. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these preliminary comments. We'll be submitting more detailed comments and suggestions to you for your consideration prior to the November 18th deadline. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Next up, we are going to have Lori Hawks, followed by Liping Zhang. Lori, your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Lori Hawks. I'm with Brown & Caldwell, based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I've been working with a group, a regional group called the North Georgia Water Resources Partnership for several years that is supportive of nutrient trading, but we don't yet have a nutrient trading mechanism set up in our state. We're fortunate that I guess in some ways we're fortunate that we are able to learn from other states and see some of the pros and cons of how those states have set up their programs. And we have some of the same drivers that other states do with the TMDL for total phosphorus, with 70%, according to EPA, of the load from the non-point sources. What we've determined is that it's a big lift to reach out to private landowners and find the right set of incentives for those landowners to participate in some sort of trading scheme. We've also looked at other things like banking and regional trading associations, but in order, my main comment is that in order to reach out to those individual landowners, we really do need to keep it simple and not be so risk adverse that we, set up procedures and forms and an overburden to that individual landowner so that they don't really have an incentive to participate. So that's my message. I appreciate the flexibility in the 2019 memo, and we have to just remember that these are individual landowners in many cases that need to keep it simple. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I will pass it on to the next person.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori. Next up, we have Liping Zhang. Liping, are you there? If you would like to make your statement, I recommend calling in on your telephone since we can't hear. Liping, please call in using your telephone. We have one more person who indicated that they would like to speak, Diana Hensley. Diana, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, Liping, I'm going to give it another try. Do you mind speaking? Okay, that may be it for our online speakers. Our speaker, Derek Wynn, indicated that he was holding comments today, but he comments. Everyone. Anybody else in the room wants to make a statement?